So I want to take a moment and cover all of the details, show you information about the writing of the summary, and talk about how the project will be scored. So um, let me go into the project details. So just as a reminder, this project, I assigned this project for a variety of reasons. Um, of course, the primary reason is to expose you to more physical science to help you solidify your understanding of physical science. But I also assigned this project so that you uh, learn to use library and internet resources. You learn to evaluate resources to determine if they meet certain established standards or criteria. You demonstrate the ability to read and summarize information as well as relate that information to the class. Somebody has their mic open, please. Close your mic. In addition, you do this project to get familiar with APA format. So just to reiterate, the purpose of this project, well, excuse me, what you have to do in this project is to summarize in your own words the article that you got approved and clearly communicate how that article relates to this lab class. I won't talk about finding an article because that deadline is past. So I will focus on the summary and then how I'm going to score that summary. So your summary has to be a minimum of 2 pages in length. Type double space 12-point font. I recommend that you use a font like Times New Roman or Calibri or Arial, something professional and not, some fancy cursive font or something that's difficult to read. Times New Roman is typically what is recommended. It has to be 2 pages long, meaning from the opening sentence to the closing period, it has to be 2 pages long, not on 2 pages, 2 pages long. So if you have to put 4 or 5 sentences on a third page to make it long enough, that's what you should do. And in fact, that's what I recommend, because if it's not long enough, you'll lose points. Um, Tight. I don't accept handwritten projects, and double spaced. And I'll show you a layout to kind of guide you regarding that, the structure that you need to follow. So it says here that you have to use APA format for the layout and structure of the paper, primarily the margins and the spacing. So I'm not requiring that you do everything according to APA format, but you do have to follow APA for the margins and the spacing. The margins for APA is 1 inch all around, and the spacing is double space. And I'll show you the layout so that you know exactly, because there is one particular place where you will deviate from double space, and I'll show you. It says use APA format except you do not need an abstract, since your summary is already an abstract. So if you've looked at your article, every article has an abstract. And what that abstract does is it gives a synopsis or summary of the article. Well, that's what you're doing. You're doing that in your own words. So you don't need an abstract and a summary, because that would be duplicating the same thing. Right? It says, in addition, do not use in-text citations. In-text citations are needed since your entire summary are not needed since your entire summary is pertaining to only the one article that you're using, and you do not have multiple sources. So let me go into this sample paper that I provided, and I'll kind of guide you here. All right. So if you click on this link in here, there's a sample paper. Shows you how the paper should be structured. Okay. Now notice the very first thing they do in their paper is an abstract. Well, you don't need that because your paper is a summary, and that's what an abstract does. Okay, so you don't need both. In addition, if you get into the body of the paper, you'll notice that at various places they refer to these sources here, according to, or here they cite in text they cite a source, or here. And notice that all of those citations are different. That is because for this paper is a research paper and they're using more than one source. So it is important for this paper that they explain where the information comes from within the body of the paper. That's why they call it in-text citations. Well, you only have one source. You don't have multiple sources. You didn't do a research paper. You didn't write a thesis or a dissertation. You're just doing a simple summary of one article, so you don't have any additional sources that need to be cited except your article. So you do not need to use in-text citations. So you don't need an abstract, you don't need in-text citations because you do not have multiple sources. Okay? So be mindful of that, because if you use them inappropriately after I've asked you not to, then you'll lose points. Okay, it says also if you quote material from the article. So if you copy something word for word from that article, you need to use quotation marks and the page number in parentheses after you close the quote. So if you copy something verbatim, you need to put it in quotation marks, and after the quote, in parentheses, put the page from your article where that material came from. Okay, and it says use the picture templates in the project folder on Canvas as a guide. Well, so here's where you find those at. Let me just open it up here. All right. So in the project folder, the picture templates. So let me show those to you so that you know what you have access to. Okay. So here is a layout of your page number 1. So it tells you here, again, use APA style for all the margins and the spacing. That's 1-inch margin all around and double spacing. The exception is this ID block. This ID block needs to be in the upper left corner of your first page, single space. Your name, course name, my name, the date. Everything else is spaced according to APA style. It says here, a cover page is optional. In fact, I would prefer that you did not include a cover page, because even if you do, your page 1 has to be formatted just like this. I would prefer if you used an abbreviated header and not a running header. Okay, you're writing a 2-page summary. You don't need a running header, so an abbreviated header is just fine, where you use the last name, your last name, and a page number. It reminds you no abstract is needed, and put 4 to 5 sentences on a 3rd page. So after you have created your ID block, got your header, then give your summary a title, space accordingly. Now let me show you in the sample paper. If you notice, the title is not, it's 12-point font, just like everything else. It is not spaced, extra space between the title and the first sentence. It is spaced accordingly, just like everything else. The only difference is it's bolded. So I would expect that you would do the same thing, and do not use the title of the article as the title of your summary. The title of the article belongs to the author who wrote it. Make up your own title for your summary. And then space accordingly. Notice there's no extra space, just plain double spacing. And then start your first sentence. And then I remind you that you do not need in-text citations because you don't have multiple sources. The only thing you're doing is summarizing one article. So I shouldn't expect to find anything else being referred to in your summary. In fact, if you're ready to copy, I will give you your first sentence. Okay? So, anybody who does a project for me, you must use this as their first sentence. I am summarizing the article named, written by, in the year. So I am summarizing the article named, put your article name, written by, put the authors of your article, in the year, put the year it was published. That's your first sentence. So as long as that's your first sentence, you have acknowledged your source. You are telling me that everything after that first sentence is going to be your explanation of the article and how it connects or relates to the lab class. So again, you should not be using in-text citations because your first sentence tells me everything I need to know about where the material you are writing about came from. So you don't need to be according to or anything like that because your first sentence is your according to. Okay? So you have given proper credit to your source in the first sentence, but that does not mean you get to copy things without properly quoting. If you quote, you must still do it properly. Otherwise, you must paraphrase properly. The other thing that I provided for you is a template to show what your reference page should look like. So references, then you space accordingly, and then a citation for only your article. The only thing that goes on your reference page is a citation in APA format for your article. You shouldn't have other books, Wikipedia, websites, nothing else on your reference page because the only thing you are summarizing is that single article. All right. So again, you have access to that simply by clicking on Picture Templates for Summary Layout. Okay, so back to the project details. So I explained to you if you quote, how to quote here. We've looked at the picture templates. I provided links to APA just so you could get a little bit familiar with who they are. I mean, if you're going to be using APA format, be good to know who is APA. APA stands for the American Psychological Association. They are the organization that establishes the standards for all scientific publication. So you are going to be utilizing some aspects of APA style. I'm not having you do everything, but just some things so you can be exposed to it. And then if you scroll down, they have a style guide. So APA style, if you wanted to look more details about APA style, they explain some things to you here. But I have given you in those picture templates guidance on how to structure your paper. Okay, so you're doing kind of a hybrid between APA and then some simpler things that I've asked you to do since you're writing only a short summary. In addition, I provided a link to a sample paper, which we've taken a look at. So for example, if you wanted to know how to format a reference page, you scroll through to the end, they show you how to do a reference page. Okay, but except they got multiple things on the reference page, you're only going to have one thing on your reference page, your article. All right. And so, utilize those tools if you need, as you need to. Article approval, I don't need to talk about that because that deadline's passed. What I will say to those people who did not get an article approved, you lost 20 points off the top. So if you're working with an article that is not approved, you can still do the project, but you lost 20 points off the top. The best you can do is 80% if you did everything else perfect. But you need to be aware. You could also get a 0 on this project if your article is not approved. If it turns out the article that you do summarize does not meet the standards that I've outlined for this project, then you will get a 0. So for example, let's say your article is not approved by me. It's not approved. And you're doing the project with an article that's not approved. And it turns out that that article is not long enough, it's not on the right topic, or it's not peer reviewed, then you get a 0. Okay? And so if you're working with an article that I did not approve, then choose wisely. You must also include a reference page with your submission. And on that reference page, you must cite your article in APA style. And that's the only thing that belongs on your reference page. You shouldn't have citations for Wikipedia, books, or other articles, since they're not valid sources for this project. Only your article is to be used to complete this project. If you do not include a properly formatted reference page with your submission, you will automatically lose 5 points in the mechanics requirements category on a rubric that I'll show you in a moment. So inevitably, students always tell me, well, I had to use other books or something to help me figure out what this article was talking about because it was very difficult. That is perfectly fine. If you use the book or website or Wikipedia or a friend to help you figure out what the article was about, great. But I don't need to know about that. I need to know about the article in your own words. So I don't really care how you figured out what the article says. Once you figured it out, tell me what the article says in your own words and tell me how it connects to the class. So the only thing that goes on your reference page is your article, and the only thing you're summarizing is your article. Plagiarism. I would hope at this stage in your academic life, plagiarism would be something that you would stay away from. But just to be sure, I've given you a reference here that deals with plagiarism. And it explains to you that plagiarism is basically stealing somebody else's work and passing it off as your own. So you are stealing somebody else's work. And there are different ways you can do that. So obviously, if you turn in somebody else's work as your own, that's plagiarism. But if you copy information from a source without giving credit, meaning you don't acknowledge your source at all, that's plagiarism. If you do not put quotation marks on material that you quote verbatim, if you copy something from that article word for word, it must have quotation marks, and beside that quote, it must have the page number in parentheses. If it is not done properly, that is considered plagiarism and grounds for 0. And I should also caution you that you want to quote in limited fashion. If you're quoting every other sentence in your summary, then you're quoting too much. You're not writing it in your own words. You're going to lose points. Giving incorrect information about the source of a quotation. So some students try to play that trick with me. They go find other information related to the topic of their article and they copy that instead of and try to use it as a summary. If you get caught doing that as plagiarism, you'll get a 0. And I will warn you that getting a 0 on this project is a big thing because this project is worth 20% of your grade. And for most students, if they get a 0 on the project, it bumps them down below a C and they wind up having to repeat the class. So my suggestion to you is you've come this far, tough it out, do your best. Tell me what the article says in your own words as best as you can. And don't try to, bypass that by copying or doing some other, stuff that's considered plagiarism. The other thing that I see students do a lot is they don't properly paraphrase. So they copy down a sentence or a paragraph, and instead of writing that information, writing what that information means to them, they just take replace some words in the sentence or the paragraph with synonyms. So they didn't copy it word for word, but they put some words in there that mean the same thing and synonyms in place of words. That is still plagiarism because that is considered improper paraphrasing because you've basically stolen the author's intent. Just because it isn't copied word for word, that does not mean it's not plagiarism. If you do not paraphrase, meaning if you do not write it in your own words, then that is plagiarism. Okay? So my suggestion and the way I tell students to avoid plagiarism is take each paragraph, read it, do whatever you have to do to figure out what it's saying, and then write that in your own words. If you do that for each paragraph, you'll have enough notes and information in your own words so that you can then write your summary. Okay? Again, it's not worth it. Again, plagiarism will result in forfeiting all points and you will get a 0. Okay? Include a full copy of your article with your submission. Normally, you would turn this in class and you would give me the summary, a reference page, and a full copy of the article. But since we are doing this by email, you will email me your summary, your reference page, and a full copy of the article. If you do not give me a full copy of the article with your submission, then you'll lose 5 points. So I don't want to have to go look for the email where you got your article approved. Attach the article as a PDF file to your submission. And if you do not do that, you lose 5 points. Okay. Again, the project is worth 100 points. And I'm going to cover the scoring rubric with you here in just a moment. You will turn in your project on next Thursday at 4 o'clock. And the following week by 4 o'clock, you will have from me your score. Okay. Let me show you the rubric that I will use. So this talks about how I'll score your project. All right. So this is the project rubric. And for every project that gets submitted, I will complete one of these rubrics. And I will return that to you electronically. And it will have your score on it. And it will have information on any points that you lost. Okay. So the project is worth 100 points. And so I took that 100 points and I broke it down into 5 categories, a maximum of 20 points in each category. So what I'm going to do now is explain what you need to do in each category to earn good points. You're trying to do your best work here. So I'm going to explain what will I be looking for in order so that you can do your best work. So in the summary category, I'll be looking for clear and convincing evidence that you wrote the summary in your own words. You're not using a bunch of technical jargon. You're not borrowing the author's language. You're breaking it down for me in layman's terms and telling me what the article means from your perspective. Okay? You're not overquoting. Again, if you quote too much, you'll lose points in the summary category. I often tell students you shouldn't quote at all, and that way you don't have to worry about that. But if you do quote, you can only do it in a limited fashion. And if you do it too much, you lose points in the summary category. Okay, so tell me the main ideas of that article in your own words. And don't overquote, and you'll be just fine in this category. Connections to lab class. So you clearly tell me how the things that you're reading about in the article relate to the stuff you've seen in class, the experiments you performed, the lab reports you've written, the post labs you've done. And so let me give you some examples of how you might do that. Okay, so it won't be vague about what I'm looking for. So you might notice that your article is structured in a very similar fashion to the layout that you follow for your lab reports. All the articles have abstracts. When you write a lab report, you write an abstract. Um, you follow a procedure, they will outline some type of procedure or methodology in the article. Analysis and conclusion. They might have results. So they follow a structure or a format that's very similar to what you are doing in your lab reports, and it would be fair game and important that you acknowledge how they do the things that are like what you do and how they do things that are different. So, for example, you don't typically write a results section. They may have a section that deals with results. They may have a section that talks about future research. You don't typically do that. So it'd be important for you to acknowledge the things that they do, the parts of the article that are alike what you do with your lab reports and the parts of the article that are different. They may be dealing with some of the properties that you've come across in the class. And by properties, I mean things that can be measured. Things like density, mass, volume, speed, force, acceleration, time, momentum, energy, temperature, heat. You've dealt with a large number of properties over the course of the semester. And inevitably, some of your articles will be dealing with some of those same properties. You should acknowledge whenever you see a property in your article that is something that you've dealt with in class. So it'd be fair game to say, hey, on experiment number 10, we dealt with temperature and heat and specific heat, and I noticed they're using that in this article. They're doing specific heat or they're using temperature. We use temperature to determine the amount of heat. They're using temperature to determine whatever. So you are showing that they are using the same kinds of properties that you might have used in your lab class. You might notice that they're using units that you're familiar with. So when you measure temperature, you use Celsius. Maybe they're using the same thing. Hey, we measured temperature in our experiment using the Celsius scale. They're also using temperature in Celsius, on the Celsius scale. Or they may use something different. Hey, we use Celsius on our experiments, but I noticed they're using Kelvin. They may do an error analysis. So one of the key things over the course of this semester has been you learning how to do percent error. And so if they're also using percent error, it'd be very important to say, hey, one of the first things we learned how to do in this class was to do error analysis using percent error. In this experiment, they're also using percent error to do error analysis, and they're comparing. Or we typically use percent error to determine how close we come to an accepted value, but they're using standard deviation. So you're showing that they're doing an error analysis, but they're doing something different than what you learned how to do. Okay? They may use graphs. Be important to point out how their graphs are alike or different from the graphs you've had to do all semester. Okay? So there are lots of ways you can establish connections. The main idea here is I want you to see and clearly express that the basic stuff you've been learning in this class, the very basic and beginning skills and concepts that you've been learning, people use them. Those people who are doing this sophisticated and complicated research are using the stuff that you're learning as the foundation. And that's important. Article choice. If you got your article approved, and you summarize the article that you got approved, you automatically get to 20 points in that category. And the only way you could lose that 20 points is if you plagiarize. If you did not get an article approved, then you automatically lose that 20 points. And remember, you could also wind up getting a 0 if the article that you're using does not meet standards. Okay? If I approved it, then it means it met the standards. But if you didn't get it approved, you're all on your own. Hopefully you choose wisely, and then you'll lose 20 points. But otherwise, you won't get a 0. But if you didn't get an article approved, you lose 20 points in the article choice, And if the article does not meet the requirements, then you'll get a 0 on the project. But what if you got an article approved and then you decide last minute you want to summarize something else? I'm going to treat it just like you never got an article approved. I used to give a 0 when students did that, but I'll treat it like you didn't get an article approved. You'll lose 20 points. And then if it turns out what you summarized is the wrong thing, you'll get a 0. Okay. Organization. Your paper has to be well organized. It has to have a very clear introduction, body, and conclusion. Just like you write an essay in an English class. You had a nice introduction, and I gave you your first sentence. So then after your first sentence and your introduction, you ought to be telling me what is it that you're going to focus on. And then in the body paragraphs, explain the major concepts that you want to explain about your article. And then conclusion, wrap it all up. Okay? So it should flow smoothly. Nice transitions between paragraphs. And the purpose for your paper is clear right from the beginning. And also notice it says, and the name and author of the article is made clear early in the paper. Well, if you do the first sentence the way I've told you to, you don't have no problem with that. But if your first sentence doesn't have the name of the article, the author, and the year it was published, then you're going to lose points in the organization category. And then finally, the mechanics requirements category. So mechanics, is your summary long enough? Remember, it has to be 2 pages long. From the opening sentence to the closing period, 2 pages long. Not on 2 pages, 2 pages long. So put 4 to 5 sentences on a 3rd page so that you meet the length requirements. Also, you should do a spelling and grammar check, because I'm not an English professor, but if there are blatant spelling and grammar errors, then I have to take points. So that's the mechanics part. The requirements part. If you do not have a properly formatted reference page, you lose 5 points in that category. If you do not include a full copy of your article, you lose 5 points in this category. So again, pay attention to what you're doing. Make sure that you're addressing the areas that I've discussed in the rubric, and you'll do just fine. Okay? So with that, I'm going to ask if you have any questions. I'm going to unshare my screen. You just unmute your mic and ask your question. I'll be happy to answer it for you.
Again, that first statement, what does it read?
Okay? Tell me when you're ready.
I'm ready.
I am summarizing the article named, and then put your article name, written by, then put the authors of the article, in the year, then put the year it was published.
Okay.
Got it?
Yes, ma'am.
So anybody else who joined a little bit after I got started here, make sure that that is your first sentence. I am summarizing the article named, fill in your article name, written by, fill in the authors of the article, in the year, fill in the year it was published. That should be your first sentence. Then after that, everything needs to be paraphrased in your own words. And if you copy something verbatim, you quote properly, according to the instructions that are in the project details. Any more questions? Please shoot.
No, ma'am.
All right. Look, if you're working between now and next Thursday, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to address any questions that you might have. Your project is due for next Thursday. The summary, copy of the article, and a properly formatted reference page. That's all I have.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, y'all take care. I'm gonna stop this recording